Hey students, it's Mr. Dowd, and this is a slideshow about the Industrial Revolution. First, I want you to go back in time with me. Back to the time of the American Revolution. Actually, about 25 years before the American Revolution. Let's say it is the year 1750, and you need a shirt. Now, today, if we needed a shirt, we would probably check with mom or dad or whoever takes care of us, and we would ask, hey, can I go to the store and buy a shirt? The problem is, in most places in America in 1750, there's really no store to go to. In cities like Boston or Charleston or New York, yes, there might be some stores, but the shirts, the clothes in those stores would be very expensive. You probably can't afford it. If you need a shirt in 1750, you and your family are going to have to make it. Now, if you live, let's say, in Massachusetts or in Vermont or in New York, Pennsylvania, you're not growing cotton. You probably have to go out and grab one of the sheep and shear it. That means you are going to cut the woolly fur off of the sheep. Now, I've had a little experience with this. Sheep are very squiggly and active and scared, and it is not easy to shear the sheep. And you can see you shear this sheep, and the wool falls on the ground, and then you have to collect all of it. And by the way, sheep don't take showers every day. Their wool is full of dirt and pine needles and grit and some of the sheep poop. It's got to be cleaned after you shear the sheep. You have to wash it in soap and water, and then you have to separate the fibers of the sheep wools. That's a process called carding the wool. You would take like two wire brushes and a little blob of the sheep's wool, and you would have to then run the brushes against each other and stretch out the sheep fibers. So this shearing and washing and carding is a lot of hard work, and it takes a lot of time. Next, you have to spin the wool. So this is after your day on the farm when all of that hard work is done. By candlelight at night, you are now running a spinning machine, and you are turning all of these cleaned and carded sheep fibers into thread or yarn. So you are spinning the wool into thread. And by the way, you probably know you're not even close to a shirt at this point. You just have balls of thread or yarn. And again, hours and hours and hours of work. Next, you need to weave all of that thread into cloth. So if you are lucky, you have a nice loom, something like you see here, or maybe you just have a simple frame, and somebody, again, at night, after all the hard day's farm work is done, you have to go through the process of weaving the cloth. And like I've already said a couple of times, this is hours and hours and hours of hard and tedious work, which also takes some skill. So we have spent so many hours at this point, and all we have is cloth. We're not even close to a shirt yet. Of course, once you have the cloth, now you can actually start making the shirt. You need a pattern, you need to measure, you need to cut it, sew it all together, add buttons, holes, any finish work you're going to add. And then, and only then, do you have an actual shirt. And this has been lots of hard work and lots of people's time in order to get just one shirt. And this is why you can't afford those shirts that are in the stores in cities like Boston or New York. It's because so much labor went into that one item of clothing, it makes the cost of that clothing very, very high. Hours and hours and hours of somebody's time and skill went into just one shirt. It's very, very expensive. Now, about the time of the American Revolution, starting in England, you have this change in how things begin to be made, and it has been called the Industrial Revolution. Unlike the American Revolution, which was a change in government, and that revolution, well, when we talk about the Revolutionary War, it was violent. This is a revolution called, I'm sorry, this is called a revolution because it was such a drastic change. It starts in someone in America, in somebody named Samuel Slater's mill. Samuel Slater was able to memorize plans for these weaving and spinning machines. These are machines that are powered by the water in a river. They build a building right next to a river. And you can see in this image these rods that run along the ceiling and are attached to barrels. And these barrels are attached to a wheel on the side of these weaving machines that you see. And these weaving machines weave the cloth. The thing is, they use the power of the river in order to run those machines way, way faster than a person with their hands could weave. And so one person monitors the machine and produces the cloth much, much, much faster. And if you are spending so many hours less of time per yard of cloth, well, then you can see how that would lower the price of finished cloth. This is also applied to machines that spin the thread that goes to make the cloth. Pretty soon you have machines that can do 8 balls of thread at one time. Whereas one person used to spend many hours to get 1 ball of thread, now one person can run a machine that makes 8 balls of thread and makes it faster than one person could have done a single ball. This is a tremendous increase in productivity, and it means the price of thread dramatically drops. Something else happens. It is invented, and this is a little bit after the American Revolution. A man named Eli Whitney invents the cotton gin, and this transforms the production of cotton. You can see this little machine is where you put cotton in the top and you turn a crank wheel and it sort of separates the fibers. And there's a screen on the bottom. Cotton has little black seeds in it. And getting the seeds out of the cotton is necessary in order to then put it in machines and make the fiber. You've got to get the seeds out. Cleaning the cotton, again, very, very time consuming. It makes it very expensive. This machine was able to quickly get the seeds out of the cotton and makes cleaning the cotton much, much faster. And again, that lowers the price. Another thing that the Industrial Revolution brought us was the factory system, the idea of interchangeable parts. If you were, let's say, had an army and that army needed guns, you would have to hire gunsmiths to make each one of those guns individually. A gunsmith or a tailor or a cobbler that made shoes would be making all of these things individually. When you now have a factory system where people will take parts of each of those items, like parts of a gun, now you have one person that has a whole box of the triggers, and another person that has a whole box of the hammer assemblies, and another person that has a whole boxes of the trigger guards. And the gun goes down a table, and each person just puts their part on. Think about it. You don't need a person that knows how to make an entire gun. You don't need a highly skilled gunsmith to make guns in this system. You just need to teach a person how to put one part onto another part and then pass it on to the next person. This allows you to make way more guns for a lot less cheaper. And then the same applies to shoes. The same applies to clothes. The same applies to teapots. All these things can now be made by minimally skilled labor, and it allows the production of these materials to happen much faster and much cheaper. Now go back to the idea of an army. You're a soldier in a battle and your gun breaks. Well, if you don't have the gunsmith that made it, well, that's the person that cast all the parts. They made the trigger. They made the trigger assembly. They made the screws that held it all together. There is no hardware store to go to. They aren't standardized. The factory system begins to standardize it. So now an army, like the young United States Army, can buy guns from a manufacturer who not only can supply the guns, but can supply the spare parts. Now you can have a wagon on the battlefield that if your gun breaks, you can go and there's parts there, and you're back in the battle pretty quickly. The Industrial Revolution changed how people worked. Pretty soon, and by pretty soon I mean over a span of about 70 to 100 years, the way people worked changed entirely. People used to be, most people in America were on small farms, and that's how they made their living. They grew a lot of the food they eat, they bartered with neighbors for things they didn't have, and the Industrial Revolution changed that to where many people, not most or all, but many, many more people were working in factories and earning wages. And instead of growing all their food or trading for food with neighbors, they were now going to the store and going to the bakery and going to the butcher and buying their food. Stores become much more prominent because now many more people are working for jobs that are paying them wages. Um, and you can see it is not just buildings that have to be next to a river for power. You're looking at a railroad yard where there's trains. Steam power is now powering transportation. Imagine flying across the American plains at 30 miles an hour, maybe even 35 miles an hour. Now, that's the speed limit on College Way. You're thinking, Mr. Doubt, that's not very fast. But the reality is that was way faster than most humans have ever traveled. The limit to your speed was as fast as a horse could go or as fast as a boat could sail. Now, you are not limited to that power. You are not limited to if there's wind or not. You are not limited to how long your horse can run before it has to stop and rest. Now, as long as there's fuel for the steam engine, you can travel as fast as the machine can carry you. Traveling long distances is now a completely different deal than it was before the Industrial Revolution. Now, a lot of changes, and they're both good and they're both bad. Goods are cheaper than ever. Americans and people all throughout the world are able to buy things that they used to not be able to afford. Factories that produce these things so much quickly and efficiently can make them for less. And where something like a store bought shirt was out of the question for most families, now that's something that you can budget and plan to buy. There are lots of jobs. These factories that open need people to work. They need people on those assembly lines. They need people to keep the machines running, and they are paying wages. Now you aren't just, your whole life is not just on a farm because that's what your family does. Now you have an opportunity to work in all kinds of different places and to learn different skills. And food production increases dramatically because of the Industrial Revolution. These powered machines are also turned to farming, and you have things like tractors that are pulling plows. It allows them um, to uh, uh, to prepare soil in much greater acreage than before, and allows them to grow food in much greater quantities than before. Um, there's more nutrition and more calories for people, which, by the way, greatly increases the world's population. Now, on the bad side, if you were a cobbler that made shoes, if you were a gunsmith that made guns, if you were a tailor that made clothes, you were probably out of business. By the mid 1800s, many of these people are gone because the factories have just produced these items, maybe not as well as you made them, but well enough and way cheaper than you could afford to sell them. And so your business is just gone. And so is your way of life. Factories produce pollution. And this pollution is in the air, it is in the water, and it is affecting the environment. And we still deal with these issues today. And especially when these factories were starting, the working conditions were often bad. Machines were very powerful and they were often very unsafe. Injuries like losing fingers and having limbs broken, and even worse, were very commonplace. And it would be whole families would be in these factories, kids as young as elementary school age kids. For middle school students, hey, you guys, most of you would not be in school. You would instead be working in a factory for way less wages than your parents were earning. And you would be working 10, 12 hours a day, and you would be working at least 6 days a week in these factories. The Industrial Revolution definitely changed the way that people work. And over the last 20 to 30 years, you have been growing up in a new revolution, a new economic revolution, and that is the digital revolution, which has also and is still changing the way that we live and work. In the digital age, we have things like e-commerce and e-banking. We have communication and entertainment at our fingertips like never before. The high-paying jobs in the economy, many of them are now digital related. Computer science skills are in high demand. Again, the economy has changed considerably in the last 30 years. And similar to the Industrial Revolution, it has changed the way people live and communicate. Um, for instance, the idea of a communication device in your pocket was something that was only seen in science fiction shows like Star Trek when I was in middle school age. Now they are ubiquitous, which means they are everywhere. Almost everybody has some type of device in their pocket with them at most times. The digital age is the new economic revolution, and we have to wait and see what takes the digital age's place. It will be exciting, and that was your very brief rundown of the Industrial Revolution.